Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Axelrod. Oh, I'm sorry. Is that better? Okay. My name is Axelrod. On behalf of the Board of Directors of the Newburgh Historical Society, actually more accurately, the Historical Society of Newburgh Bay in the Highlands, which was given to the regional organization, which was founded back in the 1800s. And also on behalf of our co-sponsors, Newburgh Free Library, welcome everyone to today's program, Growing Up in Newburgh. This program is intended as a trip down memory lane for those of us who grew up in Newburgh and an opportunity to relive part of our youth. Most of the good times, but for some, not always good times. However, we are also hopeful it'll provide some insight into what growing in Newburgh was like from approximately the mid-40s to the late 80s. For those of you who did not grow up in Newburgh, or those from a younger generation, it doesn't look like there's many here, who grew up here in later years. At this time, I have the pleasure to introduce a gentleman without whom I'm not sure we would be here today. He has offered invaluable assistance in setting up this program, and will share with you the logistics with regard to some of the protocols that must be followed due to COVID, and further how those who could not attend due to the space limitations imposed or because they no longer live in the area will be able to view the program. Accordingly, it's my privilege to introduce Christopher Morgan, Programming and Marketing Librarian for the Newburgh Free Library. Chris is in the back.
Hi, welcome everyone. Thank you everyone. Thanks everyone for joining us today, and thanks for all of our panelists in the Newburgh Historical Society. Just real quick, there is a restroom if anyone needs it, out on the left by the staircase. We do ask, because of COVID, that audience members keep their masks on at all times. We understand that seating was limited because of COVID. So this program is being recorded, and it's going to be on the Newburgh Free Library YouTube channel, so it can be viewed after the presentation. All right, and I'll turn things back over.
I just want to mention one thing that, one thing, when anyone is speaking to ask a question or give some insight, you can put your mask down. We got permission. So now is the time we're going to introduce our illustrious panel and moderator. So in no particular order, I'll start from this side. I'll skip our moderator. Right to my left is Genie Abrams. Genie was born and raised in Newburgh, where her father was city manager from 1958 to 1960. I didn't do it. 1963, when she was 13.
Oh. I'm not sure what that is. Yeah.
Is it from this? No.
I don't
think it's coming from over there.
It's from that speaker.
From the speaker there? Yeah. All right.
Do we need it?
Let me get our IT technician real quick.
Should I wait?
You can continue on, but
Well, we'll see.
without the microphone for now. Sorry.
We're of the age we don't need to know that part of the program. That wasn't on the... In 1963, when Genie was 13, her family moved to Albany. She earned her bachelor's and master's degree from the Newhouse School of Journalism at Syracuse University, and pursued a career She pursued a career as a reporter, copy editor, and later public relations specialist for nonprofits, including Planned Parenthood and religious organizations. She returned to her roots to Newburgh in 2002 and served on the Newburgh City Council from 2013 to 2007. She is the author of the Louis Levy series of novels. Most recently, Louis Levy's Heading Home, available at Amazon and Barnes & Noble. short, Barry Schuyler, who, by the way, graduated high school in year after I did, so I remind him he has to respect his elders. Barry is a fourth-generation Newburgh. After his father graduated from Albany College of Pharmacy, following his time a year during World War II, the family returned to Newburgh, living first in an apartment on Johnson Street in the south of Farrington, and later moving to Grant Street in New York. Barry attended kindergarten at the Grant Street School, and then St. Mary's Elementary School in Genie, and then was followed by working in high school for 9th grade, then at grade 10 through 12th. He has degrees from SUNY New Paltz, Cornell, and Columbia University. Barry's a CPA, and after working in Madrid, Spain, and Manhattan, he returned to Newburgh to work with his family. He indicates it would be very difficult for him to leave the Hudson Valley, and he is thrilled with recent developments improving our lovely city, including especially the great work of Habitat for Humanity. Larry's late brother, David, an educated historian and author, wrote the definitive biography of the Newburgh native Andrew Jackson Downing. Two from the end is the lovely Gina Prokosch. Dr. Gina Prokosch was born and raised in Newburgh, graduating from NFA in 1986. She earned a bachelor's degree from Union College in Schenectady, and her doctorate in dental surgery from Columbia University College of Dental Medicine. Gina played basketball competitively through college and coached many years at the Sacred Heart School in Newburgh. She was also an avid fundraiser for the Sacred Heart School, chairing countless golf tournaments and other events. She and her husband, Kevin Cook, raised and continue to raise their 4 children, Emily, Katie, Jake, and John in Newburgh, and have followed their children in their athletic pursuits all over the eastern seaboard. Gina has practiced in Newburgh since completing her residency in 1995. In 2002, she started her own dental practice in New Windsor. She's an active member of the 9th District Dental Society, where she serves on the Board of Governors, the New York State Dental Association, the American Dental Association, and is the past president of the Dental Society. And the last but not least, down in the end, Wilbur Higgins. Wilbur was born and raised in Newburgh, growing up on Water Street before those houses and businesses were torn down in the urban renewal program. He left Newburgh only to graduate from London University in Pennsylvania, returning to spend his entire career in 1971 to 2007 working for the City of Newburgh as Recreation Director and Youth Bureau Director. His achievements include construction of the Activity Center, renovation of the Delano Hitch Stadium into a minor league baseball, football, and professional-sized soccer facility, renovation of the Ann Delano Hitch Aquatic Center, development of Newburgh Landing and the Washington Street boat launch, rehabilitation of the abandoned Montgomery Ward's Cadillac store into the Youth Bureau and Center, and rehabilitation of the Stanwick Coil building into a youth center. Past board affiliations include chairman of St. Luke's Cornwall Hospital Board, member of the Newburgh YMCA Board. He currently serves on the Ann F. Bourne Memorial Fund and as board vice president of Meals on Wheels of Greater Newburgh, and is a board member of the Greater Newburgh Parks Conservancy and vice chairman of the Newburgh Armory Unity Center. Boy, that was... Okay. That's the panel. Now we have, and I don't think she may not need much introduction, our moderator. It will be my distinct honor and pleasure to introduce our moderator, Mary McTamaney. Mary is a lifelong Newburgher whose ancestors settled in Newburgh between 1857 and 1872 in the same downtown in Abrams where she still resides with her young husband here, Dave. Also was a classmate of mine. Watching their lives unfold, her ancestors, and listening to their stories, Stewart has studied history with a focus on personal lifelines.
She worked for 36 years as a librarian and library administrator, including 2 years abroad, where she could continue to sort out answers to interesting questions with each new patron or student who sought information. Mary has been Newburgh City Historian since 2003, a volunteer job that she accepted when she retired from being a librarian and library administrator. She is known for her weekly Newburgh Heritage column that she writes for the Mid-Hudson Times. At age 75, she clearly remembers Newburgh before and during its urban renewal destruction. Now, just so that I don't get into trouble, I just want to tell you that I would not comment on anybody's age. However, these bios were prepared by each of the panelists, so I don't want to get hate. At the local, regional, and state level, Mary has served on many boards and committees that advance libraries and information, and libraries and information sharing, and of course, the preservation of history. She is currently working on projects that digitize and archive maps and images to share statewide. At this point, we'll turn it over to Mary.
Hi, everybody. I'll try to talk loud, and if I'm not loud enough, when I get up here, just tell me grab a mic, and we'll hope that the Rottweiler isn't in the wall.
They just updated it, Mary. So
I know. We brought together 20 pictures today to just give a few of you who may not be rooted in Newburgh as long as I have been, to kind of understand the landscape that we're all going to be talking about. And so here is my birthplace, 188 Du Bois Street. And when I was 8, we made the big move across the street to 199. And so this is a typical Newburgh story. You're born in a little apartment post-World War II. Your siblings come along, your parents don't fit, and they seek bigger quarters. And so this is where I came from. This is where our panelist Genie Abrams came from. Here's Farrington Street, back in the days when we had a lot of snow and no snow blowers, and tunneled our way around as children. Here is Wilbur Higgins' childhood home on North Water Street. In fact, that's Wilbur chasing another neighbor running around the front door of 257 Water Street. Also, like me, one of the units in an apartment building. And here, I found this picture because it's important to me. Linda Lewis-Berger over there lived at 150 Montgomery, which was my godmother's house. I spent a lot of time here when I was a little girl. And when my godmother's parents passed away, mother and then father, Betty, my godmother, sold the house to a young police officer named Runston Lewis. And so I'm thinking that one of these girls out front, probably the bigger one, is you. And so this is what downtown Newburgh looked like. This is how you approached the city from the water. If you rode in a car, if you rode on a bus, you still got to the shore, and to get to the rest of the world, you crossed that water. Everything you see in this picture is gone. So this is the Newburgh of our childhood, and yet we all know that so much of what we experienced, riding our bikes and walking around and shopping for our grandma, is no longer there. That's downtown Newburgh in the 1940s. This is how everybody approached us. If they didn't come by car down Route 17, they came by water even in their cars. So there's the big old Newburgh Beacon Ferry, that's the Duchess. Here's what you experienced when you landed in Newburgh in our childhood. This is coming across from Water Street and Front Street and up Colden Street. There's a police officer in the road, and I remember when they used to stand in the middle of the road, and in the winter they'd stand on a piece of cardboard because the pavement was so cold through their shoes, and direct traffic. So to go wherever you were going, there was somebody there with a whistle telling you which way and whose turn. Colden Street again, looking up toward Broadway. Come on. I know you can do it.
I think there's something on the screen.
Well, that's just a label.
On the computer. On the computer.
Oh, thanks. Took my glasses down. All right. Thank you very much. experienced Broadway, but this was Broadway of our childhood. Broadway when every shop was filled and different, and you experienced almost anything you needed in the way of retail, but also entertainment and services was all along our main artery. I took the bus a lot. I was a North Side 6 kid. But some were Broadway, some were South Side. And you hopped aboard, and I still remember pulling the string to stop at the next intersection if it was where I needed to get out to do an errand, visit a friend, or get home on time. We walked, we rode our bikes, we went to the Newburgh Library, which used to look like that, not like what we're in right now. That's the old library down the street. We played on playgrounds. There's Genie's playground on Farrington. We went over to the rec and joined teams. You swam. This is the Pony League coaches. So if any of you were in Pony League baseball, you might have had one of these gentlemen as your coach. We just went into the park. I loved hours in the park. I just wandered in from Du Bois Street and fed the ducks and watched the world go by. We went in to skate. Down in Parks Pond was also our skating rink. We went because our parents, like the Warners here, dragged us in all dressed up on holidays to have our picture taken around the flowers. And then change came, and this is the carving out of South Street. It's the beginning, 1959, of a real physical transformation of Newburgh. This is downtown. That's that ferry you saw coming in, but now there's a big hole in the middle. There's a big grassy, empty spot because we were beginning to toy with changing our city. And little eyes like ours were seeing that and saying, what's going on? And this is what we saw as we walked along the street. This is Montgomery Street, and you sometimes, as a child, walked or rode your bike around rubble. And why? What was this? What was this all about? Out we would go to Big Scott, the city line. So the city line meant an awful lot. You were leaving your hometown, getting into the next town, and things were beginning to develop and lure you to leave those downtown streets and go out to the edge. This is Big Scott, which is now Newburgh Vintage Emporium. But it was built as a roller rink and then turned into the first big department store. And downtown began to look like this, and then like this. And then it was gone. This isn't a story only about downtown, but it's a story you'll hear from all of us about what we experienced growing up while Newburgh was coming down. And here is the new frontier. This is Lloyd's when it was first built, and it is the vast farmland around the intersection that is now so full of cars driving on the pavement and being sold to you that you hardly know where you are. But that's the changes we experienced, and I just thought I'd give those of you who didn't walk that path with us here a sense of what it looked like. So as we tell you what it felt like, you'll have that understanding. And my job in the middle, I think, is to be kind of like Glenn Eiffel at a political debate. I decided, Alan asked me to moderate, and everybody has wonderful stories to share with you, so there's not much moderation that's going to be needed. But I think if we just go along the table, maybe we'll start with Wilbur this time, because he got to be the last one on the snap the whip line, the first round. And just let each of us tell you, where did we grow up? What was that neighborhood like? How many people were in our household, in our building, to get a real social picture of what it was like to be a child coming up through Newburgh in mid-20th century, where we went to school, where did we play? Those are the sorts of things that we'll introduce you to as we each speak. So, Mr. Wilbur Higgins.
You're a hard act to follow.
I had pictures.
I grew up on North Water Street. North Water Street contained many different cultures. It was a melting pot of Newburgh, really. We had everything in 3 blocks. We had our own playground, which was built by the Lions Club. We had the ferry. We had 2 bridges, which is hard to believe. In the middle of the city, there were 2. One for the still in existence, for the Regal Bag Building, which we used to go on and watch the train come. Mr. Kaplan used to yell at us. And one was, I don't know if anybody remembers McDonald's, the feed store. There was a swinging bridge there. We used to go on and play and swing back and forth, and unbelievable didn't fall on the railroad tracks. But it was a working man's town back then, when I was a kid. And people respected one another. As kids, we played together, went to our local neighborhood school. We ate at each other's house. You know, there was no color. There was no feeling that someone was better than anyone else. We were just kids having fun, living life. But some of the memories I have are when I was younger, the Strawberry Festival at the Dutch Reformed Church. I don't know how many people know that, where they used to have the white linen tablecloths and the flowers on the table. And used to be, I imagine it was champagne along with the strawberries, but we never got in that far. The Palatine Hotel. We always tried to sneak into the revolving door, but the doorman always got us. The Academy Theater, one of the 3 theaters within 2 blocks on Broadway. Now there's not a theater on Broadway anymore. Times have changed. We used to go there on Saturdays and watch this cowboy western serial. It was fun. It was cheap. Now, then it might have been maybe 5 cents to go in. Now you go to a movie theater, you have to bring your bank account with you. The day line. We used to get on the day line, go to Rye Beach, go up the river. It was a big experience to get out of Newburgh and just ride down the Hudson River. Beautiful river. Schoolmakers. We used to go to Schoolmakers every time we could when the train would come, because you're right in the middle of the hallway, stand there and feel the vibration of the train as it went down the tracks. And Christmas time, it was always fun to go there to sit on Santa Claus's lap and tell him what you wanted for Christmas. But the nicest thing about Water Street was Christmas time. All the stores had trees and lights. It was special. It was very nice. I was very fortunate when I was young to get a membership of the YMCA. That kind of dictated my life. We went there every day after school, and all day Saturdays there. And during the summer, we went to the daycare. But it was something about having all different kids playing together, learning different things that's going to lead them through their lives. I did bring some photos of the old YMCA circus. I don't know how many people remember that, but it was enjoyable, very enjoyable. From Water Street, we moved to Chambers Street. One day, I think I was coming home from the Y, and I saw these men walking on Water Street with clipboards and briefcases, and I got home and asked my parents, I said, who are these people? And they said, they're from the Urban Renewal Program. They're rebuilding, they're planning on taking all the homes and businesses, knocking down, and rebuild to a new Newburgh. And I think we're still kind of waiting for that new Newburgh to be built. From Chambers Street, I graduated from NFA, went on to college, and then I came home late in my freshman year, and I noticed my Newburgh had changed. Buildings were going down on Water Street, the businesses were gone, people had changed. The whole Newburgh was just, like many other cities across the country, experienced a lot of the social problems, and it was not good. But Newburgh is still trying to overcome the problems, as we've seen the past week with the young kids and the guns, and it's a tough world for people in Newburgh. But Newburgh has been my home. I worked 30-some years with the recreation department, and I enjoy raising kids. I have one of my own, but I think I probably spouse and kids and everything. But Newburgh is on the way back. There are a couple places that are starting to rebuild. It's down on Liberty Street. And I also have some brochures from places. Reminds me of the YMCA, the Newburgh Unity Center. I have some of the schedules of the programs from this current semester, and we'll be starting the new ones in January, the new semester. So they'll be at your own table if anyone wants to grab a few and see what's going on, and maybe register their kids or grandchildren in the next semester. One of the things I'm most proud of was marrying a Newburgh girl, Laura Reyes here. She's sitting over there. Very thankful for that. And that's basically about it. Any questions? And anyone like to ask me?
Well, we're talking about the Newburgh Unity Center. Explain for a minute what it is.
Let me ask the audience, can you hear us well enough? Okay, because we can pass this back and forth. It sounds like the dog is gone. So as you ask questions or answer them, we can do this.
The Newburgh Unity Center was the old armory on South William Street. Bill Kaplan has been the inspiration behind rebuilding the armory into a youth center where kids can go. It's a safe place for kids to go, to learn, to play games. We have everything from pilot lessons to, you name it, coding. Everything is in the center. We have classes for parents, and it's just a safe place where kids can be themselves and learn and have fun and just get off the hard streets of Newburgh.
Yes, go ahead.
What's happening behind the soccer field? All the trees are out there and play soccer field or Higgins?
Oh, that's a different place entirely. The question was, what's happening behind the soccer field? That's the west end of town. The Newburgh Armory Unity Center is the south side. And up behind NFA, they're building another NFA facility. So it's going to be the Career and Technical Education Academy is going to be its name. It's basically a large vocational school. You know how there's NFA Main, which is on Fullerton that we all knew, NFA North, which is formerly North Junior High School and now a secondary school too, and NFA West, which is the old West Street School. Well, now there will be a career NFA, and it will be up in what, when we grew up, we all called the woods. So I just wrote that all up for the next week's Mid-Hudson Times. So there'll be pictures of what the sanitarium used to look like and what's going on in the woods.
I don't want to correct Wilbur because I'm much older than this, but actually, when I was a kid, there were 4 theaters, not 3 of them, but the Academy, which burned down in 1954. Between the Broadway and Ritz, there was a small theater called the Cameo. I don't know, that may have been gone, Wilbur, by the way.
Yeah, it's going on. I remember that.
And then my mother-in-law told me when she was a kid, there were 7 movie theaters. Instead, in addition to those 4, there was the park, which was up near Broadway, Robinson, that's where Hudson Road used to be. There was one in the Heights on Liberty Street going up to the Heights on the left.
Strand, that was
The
the
Strand.
Strand.
And then there was a third one. And those 2 I remember hearing about. The third one, either on Lanzer or Chambers Street, just off of Broadway, there was another movie theater. I don't remember what the name was, but there was 7 at one time.
There were indeed. So Newburgh was a preview city for live theater and then a very robust city for film. So people came from all around the Hudson Valley for entertainment here in Newburgh. We were the hub. And, you know, the Ritz is under construction and we should get more live venues back again. So We'll go along this table, and then there'll be time for you to ask your questions of any of us again at the end. But let's move on to Gina Prokosch Cook. Dr. Cook is a dentist here in the community, but grew up on Galloway Avenue. So Gina, take it away.
Okay. I think I'm okay without the mic,
Okay.
if everyone can hear me. I'm humbled by the experiences and accomplishments of my panel, and I'm obviously of the audience, because it's kind of nice, but I feel like I'm amongst the younger in the room here. I grew up in Galloway Avenue in the city of Newburgh in a single-family home. If anybody's familiar with Galloway, it's off of Fullerton, only 2 blocks off of Broadway. My dad still lives there. The house prior to belonging to my parents belonged to my grandparents, who my grandfather, my maternal grandfather, was a veteran of World War II and came home ill and suffered from a brain tumor, and that very shortly after purchasing the home, my grandmother, fortunately, they purchased mortgage insurance, and my grandfather died just 3 days after my mom was married at 18 years old. And my grandmother moved in with her parents on Vaness Street, which is just a block away, on the opposite side of Fullerton Avenue, 1 block off of Broadway, right behind what is now Rhinebeck, the new Rhinebeck Savings Bank that came to Newburgh. It was Columbus Trust, Key Bank, the whole bit, most recently Citizens. And my grandmother lived there until she just died 1 year ago at 98 years old. So I grew up in the city of Newburgh, surrounded by many generations of my family. I don't think I had to go out of the city of Newburgh to get to anywhere. My paternal grandparents were on South Street. My father grew up on Larder Avenue, west end of town over by DuPont. My father's family continues to have a heating, ventilation, and air conditioning business on South Street in the city of Newburgh. So the family business kept everyone very close, multiple generations of the family very close. When I was a little girl, that business was Curry Sheet Metal in the Heights by South Junior High on Monument Street. I remember first going into it there when my grandparents first bought the business. And then they built the building on Route 52 on South Street in 1972. So I remember climbing through that construction site when it was being built. Galloway Avenue, 1 block off Broadway. Broadway was the thing that we couldn't wait to do. But of course, I grew up in a very tight-knit, I think I was probably 10 years old before I was allowed to cross Galloway Avenue. But then, eventually was allowed off my block. But all of our entertainment, when we were kids, the block was full of children. Everyone, I was a family of 3, I'm the oldest of 3 children. Every house had children. Very few didn't. And all of our entertainment came by playing ball in the street. From kickball to wiffle ball to stickball, whatever we could do. Running the bases, throwing baseballs from driveway to driveway, and eventually when one of our parents would finally give in and put a basketball hoop up and we would play outside. When we got old enough, we were allowed to travel 1 block over to the opposite side, one side of Vaness behind Broadway where there were parking lots. So our games got bigger because we were no longer bouncing balls off streets, off cars parked in the street and upsetting the neighbors. So then we got to play in the parking lot next door. Our childhood was wonderful. I played with, like Wilbur mentioned, I played with children of every race and color and ethnicity, and there was no color. It just didn't matter. But, and my house, I'm from a primarily Italian upbringing. My house, there was never just the 5 of us for dinner. Whoever was there that needed to stay for dinner or wanted to stay for dinner could come for dinner. And that's always how it was, because we had some friends and neighbors that rode their bikes and mom worked nights and was a nurse or somebody wasn't around. Come in and have dinner. That's always how it was and continued to be for many years. I mean, my parents never officially fostered children, but my brother had high school classmates that lived at our house. I had a college roommate who came back and lived at my parents' house. It's just how it was. It was always an open door for everyone. I went to Sacred Heart School, so I never rode a school bus until I played my first away basketball game. Because I lived right in the city, so I walked everywhere. We walked to school at Sacred Heart. I went to North Junior High, I walked to school. I went to NFA, I walked to school. was always a very nice thing, because everything was here. My parents didn't have a second car. You know, when I was a small child, we walked with my mother anywhere we needed to go on Broadway. You know, we walked to get our shoes at Buster Brown, down by Liberty, we walked to Woolworth's. Unfortunately, I have no memories of anything on Water Street. I hear from everyone, but I have no memories of any of that. But Broadway was still very vital. Everything we needed was there. Grocery stores, shoe stores, Stevens and Bloom sporting goods, all those kind of things that we wanted to get to, we could, you know, Sam's Slipper Shop and all the neat little, you know, Jansen's and Sweet Orb when we wanted to buy our Sweet Orb pants, and, you know, all those things were there. And it was, I bought my first home across the street from my parents in the city of Newburgh. I was in dental school, we got married, and a year after we, you know, after I was done primarily most of my dental school, I commuted for a year, and we lived on Galloway Avenue, maintained that house for quite some time, and now my brother owns it. So Galloway is its own little enclave. It's very protective. It's like extended family. You know, everyone knew everyone. As a matter of fact, my husband always felt like he was kind of the outsider when he came to Galloway, because it was almost like open door policy. I think he had a little bit of a tolerance for a little bit of time before we moved out to Fostertown. Although I found, as growing up a city girl, I moved to Fostertown, and I was so not used to the noise of the city. I grew up in a city. There was always, I could hear traffic on Broadway. I could hear drag racing sometimes on nice summer nights. There was always noise and always people close. So when I moved to Fostertown, it scared me to death. Even though I had neighbors, because I found it very far away. Everything was very far away. And I never had any doubt about coming back to the city. Family was important to me. I was going to come back and raise my family where I was raised, where I had a wonderful childhood, and I received a wonderful education, and never had any doubts about coming back. No regrets there. We came back and raised our family, and now we live closer to the city again, just over the city line on Grand Avenue. And I love that we're drop-by again. You know, I always say Fostertown, nobody ever found us, and now I'm back in the drop-by neighborhood, so I see my family a lot, because I'm on their way by, so they stop by. So I feel very strongly that Newburgh gave me a lot, and I really I believe a lot in giving back to community. You know, community makes us who we are, not just our family, not just our genes, not just our experience, but our community makes us who we are. And I think that it's really important that everyone like you with similar experiences comes back and gives back to the city. Because if we want to improve the city, which obviously we all kind of feel like it's beyond its heyday, we want to see that come back, then it takes people like all of us to make it happen. And I think, unfortunately, the youth of today doesn't have any of that, doesn't see any of that, and we have to find a way. Like I say this, have these conversations with the leadership in my church. They can't just be people our age and older coming, because then it's going to die. If we do not engage our youth to make them understand what we had, then where are we going to be? So that's a question I like to pose to everyone, because it kind of troubles me. I see so many people willing to flee and just go elsewhere, and you'd love to see it become what it used to be. Because to me, it was a wonderful place to grow up. So that's my Newburgh experience.
I know that I spoke with a group of students from SUNY Orange. That's on. Not on there. Okay, I spoke to a group of students from SUNY Orange several times, actually, over the years as city historian, but I've asked a couple of those classes. Okay, there's 60, 70 of you in this room. You all grew up here? Do you all live in Newburgh or near? And in 5 years, where will you be? In 5 years, how many of you see yourself living here in Newburgh? Nothing. And I said, come on, you're breaking my heart. You can't do this to our hometown together. I said, none of you are coming back? And after prodding for 3 or 4 minutes, I might have gotten 3 out of 60 hands to go up, and that is the story that Gina's telling. That it's very hard. Young people cannot see future on these streets. And that's our challenge, I think, because I could see future. As we talk, I know that everybody remembers walking past the open windows and open doors of places of employment. And so you heard click, 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 click. You heard all the industry going on. You heard Josephine's mother sewing a handbag. You heard somebody weaving a carpet. You heard what was going on. There was enterprise here. And now there is enterprise beginning again, but it's not so evident that there are Atlas Industries over there on South William. There are small entrepreneurial things that are building again, but I don't think it shows yet to all those students who wouldn't put their hand up. So Gina's right, it's a real challenge. But somebody who did stay, walking down the table here, Barry Schuyler, who is a certified public accountant and lifelong Newburgher, grew up on Grand Street, right up the road from where we sit, and I'll let him tell you his experience and his eyes of childhood.
Hi, everybody. So, before I get specific, I want to make a general comment or two about what I thought in preparation for our meeting today. And Wilbur and Gina both touched on it a little bit, but my experience in Newburgh, both on Johnson Street, where we lived from kindergarten until 8th grade maybe, and then on Grand Street, was that we grew up in neighborhoods. Now I know that's not specific to Newburgh or unique to Newburgh, but in both situations, the streets were lined with families that had children of all ages, which meant that we could entertain ourselves and organize our own activities right within our own neighborhoods. Sporting events and mostly sporting events in my case, but just about anything that you wanted to do, it was neighborhood oriented a lot. Another general thought was, and Gina mentioned this just a minute ago, is that we walked and biked anywhere. Parents did not drive us. I mean, my parents were wonderful, but my memory is that in the morning they pushed us out the door and then called us back for dinner or something like that. But I kind of revel in that because it created a sense of independence. We had to organize our own matters. You know, there was far less by way of organized activities. I mean, we did play Little League baseball and basketball and this and that kind of thing. But much of our activities were ones that we organized ourselves and generated our own rules and ground rules on a baseball field and things like that. So my mother's family, my mother's maiden name is Collier, Ruth Collier. They've been here for so long, I think 4 generations is not quite enough to count. And she was wonderful and charming and knew everything about Newburgh. I mean, we would take her out for dinner and we'd say, "Mom, who's that?" She'd know who they were, where they lived, what they did. And that's the small town that Newburgh was at the time. One little anecdote, on my father's side of the family, they were here at least 3 or 4 generations. And I was having something to eat at the Grandstand restaurant that was just across from the recreation park in Newburgh. And I was sitting in a booth, and in the booths at the time, there were photos of different police officers. I'm not sure why. So in the booth where I was, I'm looking, and there's my great-grandfather named Stephen Schuyler in a police uniform. So I thought, that's kind of proof that we've been here for some time. Then we moved to Grand Street, and we had the distinct pleasure of having as co-tenants in the two-family house, but the Moriello family. And Ida Moriello is here with us today, and has been just a great friend of us all. And it's so lovely to see Ida, really.
Wonderful.
I'd love to hear what Ida would have to say. Ask a question, Ida, okay? Say something. You know, another anecdote that I recall when I'm talking to people in my office who don't know what Newburgh might have been like. I played CYO basketball at St. Mary's School. That's the one on Genie Avenue. The church is on South. And once a year we play basketball against a team in Beacon. And so we would meet at the school and walk to the ferry station, take the ferry across, and then walk up and play the game. And then when we're finished, win or lose, we'd walk back the same way. And, so those are two early recollections of mine. Alan mentioned that my late brother David, a wonderful historian and author, wrote what they call the definitive biography of Andrew Jackson Downing. Andrew Jackson Downing was an eminent landscape architect who changed a lot of things about how Americans viewed culture and living in unique surroundings with nature. And he had a worldwide presence. He died young, and two really prominent historical figures, Frederick Law Olmsted and Calvert Vaux, both of which were important in the design of Central Park in New York City, as well as the Washington Mall. They actually designed Downing Park. Downing died young. He died in his 20s in a sea accident. And he was so respected by these, eminent, prominent landscape architects that they created Downing Park in his honor. Downing Park is a real gem. It still is beautiful. There were, I think it's been mentioned already that in the springtime, the park was just beautiful. I mean, there were fields and fields of tulips and flowers. And so Easter Sunday, if the weather permitted, the whole city ended up somehow at Downing Park, and that was a real pleasure. Downing Park has a lot of rolling fields. It has a band show. It has other architectural features, and it has the Poly, where we saw a picture of it earlier, where people went to ice skate. It's and it was always, if the weather permitted, it was crowded as could be. They served hot chocolate for God knows what amount of money in the shelter there. Which what? A nickel?
A nickel. Oscar Decker.
Oscar Decker is there.
I must not have had a nickel. But if you were from Newburgh, you ended up at Central Park, or excuse me, Downing Park, well, Central Park to us, right? So, I think that's all that I'll touch on for the moment.
I'll ask you a question.
Thank you, Barry. I can remember I only lived a block outside of Downing Park, and so I thought it was my yard. And for all of you who played in the street, I played in the street, although I got slammed by my father for playing in Du Bois Street once. And never went out in the middle of the road again. I was only 2 doors diagonally from the central firehouse, so it was wise not to let me play in the road. But I can remember coming home a couple of nights from skating on that Downing Park Poly with my skate guards on my skate blades and walking on them, which isn't good for your skates or your ankles. But I was so frightened that if I undid those skates up in that shelter house, that my feet would fall off. That I skated for so many hours that my feet were so frozen that I was sure that if I unlaced the skates, my feet would be inside and I would walk home on stumps. That's how much fun it was to just be up there with your friends for hours and hours and hours. And there were easy neighborhood places to enjoy together. And one question I've asked of everybody, did you feel safe in Newburgh as a child? And I did. Wherever I went, I would get on my 56 Schwinn Tornado, which is now over at the Velocipede Museum, because I'm so old, and I could ride anywhere. As Wilbur said, they kind of opened the door and out you went, and but uphill and down Dale, and probably places my parents would rather I didn't fly down hills on my bike, but we were feeling safe as kids. Now, of course, my childhood is, 1946 to 1964. Some of you came a little later, may have had moments when you didn't feel as secure. But I think it was a wonderful place to grow up. So when we finish, we'll probably all have summaries of what we think this city gave us that we carried forward into our lives. But the next person who enjoyed this childhood and carried some of Newburgh into her future life is Genie Abrams.
Thank you, Mary. Do I have to use this? No. Everybody wake up. It's exercise time. If you raise your hand, if you were into chair exercises, raise your hand if you remember the Liberty Street Playground. Before it was called Audrey Carey Park, it was called Liberty Street Playground. There were, do you remember, other hand, remember that they had counselors? They had paid, the city had paid counselors. A guy for the boys and a young woman for the girls. And we used to sit, my family lived at 12 Farrington, right across the street. So that we could dash across, hop over that iron fence. Because what's the fun of going through the gate? You climb over. And on the side of the First Methodist Church, on the south side of the park, it wasn't the first United Methodist Church, because the Methodists didn't unite until 1968. But it was the First Methodist Church. Near there, on that side of the park, there was a beautiful horse chestnut tree. And under that tree, it cast a beautiful amount of shade, and there was a picnic table. And the girls, the counselor who was a girl, I suppose it was a Mount St. Mary's student, perhaps, she would teach us how to make lanyards with those stretchy plastic thingies. Remember that? Remember that thing? And they had the little square part you could slide up and down. So cool. So cool. And then she also taught us how to make potholders with the looms. Over, under, over. Even I could do that. Over, under, over, under. It was great. You'd come home, give them to mom or whoever. They also had in that playground basketball hoops. I hate to say this, but I'm going to say it, for the boys, because that's how it was then. And the hoops were down near Liberty Street, on the Liberty Street side. There might have been only one, and they played half court, or maybe there were two. But the boys would kind of hang out near there, and especially the bigger boys, like my brother Dave, 14 months older brother. There was, right in the middle of the playground, there was something that we called, I think Newburgh is unique in this. Who knows, raise your hand if you know the term tether ball. You know how to play it. Yes? Did you ever hear it called Zell ball? No. Zell ball. Dave, do you remember that? Why did we ever call it Zell ball? Nobody knows.
I remember it was up, if you're behind NFA and you're going up South Street, the very top level up there. That's where we were over that summer.
You had tether ball, you had Zell ball?
And the Zambito girl.
Okay.
Dr. Zambito was a dentist. His daughter was the one teaching us how to make the lanyards.
Yeah.
And then we go play Zell ball.
Yeah, Zell ball. Good. I never heard any other. No city in the world calls it Zell ball. Everybody else calls it tether ball. We had, we talked about this a little bit, but there was a police athletic league, the PAL. They sponsored baseball, I believe football, I'm not sure, Warner or what, but they played with the kids. The cops lived in the city. That's something you don't see anymore. And they played with us. We mentioned the ice skating at the Poly, the warming house, the hot chocolate, the sneakers under the bench. Just no lockers or anything, you just put your sneaks there, and you knew darn well they'd be there when you came back, because they didn't fit anybody else, probably. We had roller skating. There was, what they call it, Mary, the Avalon? The Avalon. But there was also roller skating. Just screw those little keys into your little metal things and to your sneaks and hope it didn't go right through your sneaks and just skate around the block with your friends.
You weren't supposed to use your sneakers.
Oh, no one told me
You were
that.
supposed to put your skates on last year's school shoes, because they had real soles. So you never threw away your old school shoes. They became your skate shoes, and of course they pinched because they were last year's and your feet were bigger. But the key then could go right into the leather. That's the trick.
Now she tells me. We had swimming at Crystal Lake. Swimming at Crystal Lake. And there's a famous picture of this guy, Dave McTamaney, with his little swim trunks on and his little shovel and his pail, with us scooping up sand from the beautiful beach that was created out there by the Mitchell brothers. And he was, we had a whole, I guess it was trucked in, I guess it was tons of sand trucked in from, was it West Point? Yeah, it was trucked in from somewhere. There was a beach, and you could go swim. Where?
From the sandbanks.
From the sandbanks there.
Where Plum Point is.
From, okay, right, the Windsor. Okay. They also had a nightclub there that was, let us say, well, it was the older kids and the adults loved it and had fun. There was rock and roll and pop musicians that were very popular nationwide that came there and played live music at that particular venue. The tree, just to have, we talked about riding our bikes out and walking all over the city. My brother and I used to ride our bikes out to the Bombville tree. Now everybody remembers the Bombville tree, right? That wasn't so long ago they had to knock it down. That was a very sad thing. That was the smallest state park. It was declared a state park 3 feet across. It was a state park. Oh well, it was a great destination or an adventure to ride your bike out that far or to hike out there. For big kids, there were the CYO, the Catholic Youth Organization, dances at I believe it was St. Patrick's Church. Plenty of non-Catholics snuck in for those dances. Don't ask me how I know. There was, they called it the junior high Y, and then the junior high Y dances on Friday nights and the high Y dances on Saturday nights. The Downing Park, we mentioned, had hosted concerts themselves with the thousands of tulips in the planted beds. And who remembers, show of hands, who remembers that there were peacocks walking around the park? There sure were. You could hear them, it's right.
From my neighborhood, you could hear peacocks.
What the heck? I don't know if they liked it or not, or when they got rid of them, but the poor peacocks. But that was fun to see. On our way to school, we walked from our house at 12 Farrington, was just a few houses up from Liberty Street. We're at the very bottom of Farrington. And we would walk up to school every day at Gidney Avenue Memorial. We walked up the top of the street, thought nothing of it, up through the park, over the hill in the park, down to South and Gidney, and then all the way down to Gidney Avenue Memorial School, walking. We also never took a school bus. There were no school buses, I think, for public school kids in those days. Not that we knew of, anyway. And the park also served as a great place for sledding, snowball fights, building snow forts. There used to be, you have to believe me, you just have to believe me, there used to be this thing called winter. It went away. We could make all kinds of forts and fun stuff. You could, on your sled, you could slide down the hill, headed down toward Du Bois Street, and if you were a daredevil, you could hang on, go over the edge of the retaining wall, and down into the street and break your neck if you wanted to, at the bottom, and get hit by a car on Du Bois Street. But there was an awful lot of fun there. I wanted to talk a little bit, if I may, a little bit about the Jewish community in Newburgh that was, and hardly is anymore. There was a big Jewish community in this city, my family among them. We had one Reform, one Orthodox, and one conservative shul, the synagogue. Everybody knows the old Jewish joke. Every Jewish family needs at least 2 synagogues. The one we go to, and the one we don't go to. Newburgh had 3. We had the Reform, the Orthodox, and conservative. That served those 3 served everybody. I don't know what year it was because our family had moved away in 1963. We moved away to my great sorrow. But The Orthodox was Sons of Israel on William Street. There was the conservative Jewish synagogue, Agudas Achim, on Grand Street, right here, across the street. And there was my own Temple Beth Jacob, which started out, which originally was on, well, down at the river, and then in the 1800s moved up to South Street between, I think, Grand and Liberty. Is that where it was? Now it's called the church, the Soul
Living in Jesus.
Living in Jesus Ministry. But over, if you look carefully, literally etched in the stone over that doorway, there's Temple Beth Jacob, and there's a little Jewish star.
Across the street from Calvary Presbyterian.
Of course, of course. And everybody here, I ratify what everybody here has said. We didn't know from, I mean, we knew that there were black and Latino, well, then it was called, we called Latino neighbors Puerto Ricans, because there was just a few families, I'm talking about late 50s and early 60s, from the Latino community. Please correct me if I was wrong. But my good friend Lucy Lugo among them was one of the very few people, but we played with everybody. And I would love to know what happened. Maybe somebody here can tell me whatever happened to our old friend Abe Frazier, who was one of my heroes. God, was he handsome. And Octavius Graham. Anybody remember Octavius Graham? He was a great one. Yeah, he had a band. It was yeah. It was just great. There was, there were also, it was just a lot of fun. Even on city council, my dad was city manager here for just a couple of years. And Irving Green, the lawyer, very sweet guy, later became a surrogate court judge out in Goshen, served on that council too. TBJ, before we started going to Temple, for the first several years of our lives in Newburgh, my Orthodox Jewish father and my Scots Presbyterian mother, as a compromise, sent us all, we all trotted up the street to the corner of Johnston and South Street to the big Unitarian church. That was a grand church. And now again, it's a black church that has I think it has a thriving congregation.
Pentecostal.
It's a Pentecostal now? Yeah, but we had a little rabbi that we all the kids loved because he was only as big as us, Norman Kahan. And before him was, for decades, was Maurice Bloom. But Rabbi Kahan, we were very, very proud of him because he went before city council when the detestable city manager Joseph McDowell Mitchell came in, and with his infamous 13 points plan, and tried to make people who were getting government assistance go get it at police headquarters and be fingerprinted when you got it, yes. And there was a Newburgh Ministerial Association that Rabbi Kahan was part of, and they came before city council, and they got Rabbi Kahan, all 5 foot, one of them, to stand up there and give their a very strong opinion that this was an immoral, unethical thing to do, and they were totally against that guy's so-called policy. We were not allowed into the Paladin Club. Did you know that? They had no Jews in the Paladin Club. And that's why we created the Jewish Community Center on Powell Avenue. We had an outdoor pool. We had an indoor, we had a rec room downstairs and locker rooms for the boys and for the girls. And we had, in the rec room was a ping pong table of which I was the champion, but who remembers? And of course, Alan remembers this better than anybody, there was a perfectly fine gym. It was so big, that building. They had a whole full-size gymnasium down there where the Jewish Community Center basketball team, proud member of the Jewish Welfare Board League, which is a nationwide league. One famous glory-filled year, became the champion, the New York State, it was the regional champions by going off with the very esteemed late Coach George Hamber. He drove them all to Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, where Newburgh beat Buffalo for the championship. My brother will never forget it. He claimed it on the way back. They all tied their jock straps onto the antenna. Remember when you had antennas on the front? I don't know what that means, but maybe you can tell. The Jewish Community Center team, just like the CYO dances let in everybody, not just Roman Catholic citizens, the Jewish Community Center team welcomed everybody, and we had a lot of kids shuffling in and out, playing for us. There was a tall, skinny guy that would play for us, yes. Curly Dillard would come in and play. There was a family called Louis Bucci and his brothers played for us. These are not Jewish names, in case you're wondering. But, and there was another tall, skinny kid went on to play for a very good player for Newburgh Free Academy in Wilbur Higgins. And so it was just filled with fun. Newburgh was just filled with fun. And as I remember it, I'm not saying it's, you know, it's one of those old people going, I'm cracky, it's not like it used to be. Because I think we're going for it. I think it's going to be better. It's even going to be better. I don't know how, but our city council, led by Councilman Bob Sklar's in the back, raise your hand, Bob. My buddy on council and his colleagues are trying. They're really trying to make policy with our city. I'm not going to say come back. I'm going to say go forward and be even better than it ever was.
I think there's a question from over here on the left. Did you have a question?
No, it wasn't a question. I just wanted to give Alan accolades for being on that basketball team that won the championship.
I don't know who that is.
No, it was for him.
You know me.
Why,
You know by my voice. I've known you since you were 10.
He played on this team. I didn't know, with this, I didn't know Hank Catlin.
You know, one of the joys of living in Newburgh is that when you listen to each other, you understand how many more connections you had than you ever understood. So Genie is talking about her Temple Beth Jacob and her very heroic rabbi, and I'm looking at Ramona Burton and understanding that another hero in the change from the 50s into the 60s was Reverend Burton. That we all have those threads that connect us to a city that often did the right thing in really hard times and raised really fine people in sometimes hard times, that all these stories are pleasant, but the truth is that you saw the pictures at the beginning. My apartment wasn't much, and neither was Wilbur's, and I'm sure neither was Barry's. And we pulled ourselves forward because we had good family, but good neighbors. And so I think that when you come from Newburgh, the character that you then have is built on your neighborhood. That there are hundreds of people who gave you lessons. You know, everybody knew where I was on that Schwinn tornado, and I got told on if I wasn't doing the right thing. And I know we would all say that. There was a certain comfort to being part of like a big neighborhood family. You talk about your temple, we all went to different churches. Did that religious experience play a role? Do you think that there was a social component to your churches and like clubs or activities that kind of pushed you in a new direction because you learned them under the roof of that house of worship?
Oh,
Yeah, they're all.
I'm a participant, not a panelist, but I just want to make a couple of comments that were things that were going on first and foremost. And I hope that was emotional. Jeannie mentioned George Handler. George's widow is sitting there. And George Handler, to this day, he came to Newburgh. He didn't grow up in Newburgh. Lois did. And they met at University of Rhode Island. Correct me if I'm wrong, Lois. George was a star athlete in New Bedford, Massachusetts. He played, and then when he got out of college, he was in the Korean War. And when he came home, they got married, and they lived upstairs in a 4-family house that I lived in on Valley Avenue, the poor end of Valley, down on First Street. And Lois and George lived upstairs. But I learned more about basketball, but more importantly, more about life from George Handler than anyone ever. He was a phenomenal coach. He came to Newburgh at a little cancellation shoe store on Liberty Street off Broadway. And he wound up volunteering, I guess, as a basketball coach at St. Patrick's High School. I think they hadn't won a game in a few years. By his second year, they were undefeated. And if they would play them. But I always remembered what George said. And I coached for about 18 years, kids from high school to 5th and 6th grade. And it's always stayed with me. And what George instilled on us is that winning is not about who scores the most runs or the most points or the most goals. It's an attitude. Winning, if you're a winner, if whatever you do, you give your best. And he would instill that. We would always schedule the toughest teams. We wouldn't care about our record, but we wanted to, the idea was to get the most out of you. And I heard him say every year at the awards dinner, and I did it for years, is that, you know, if you become a winner, later in life, no matter what you wind up doing, it's gonna work well for you, because even if you don't always, if you don't always get the bid, if you're a salesman, but if you give it your best, you're going to be a winner. And I learned that from Coach Hammer, and as did and a lot of kids. I just want a couple of comments that came up. Unlike most of the people here, my parents my father came to Newburgh in 1938 as a bachelor from Brooklyn, and my mother, who was born in the Lower East Side, then moved to the Bronx, came as a bride in 1943. So I had no relatives in Newburgh. I was born in 1946, my brother in 44. We lived on Valley Avenue, the poor end, down near First Street. In fact, Valley Avenue used to end at 3rd Street and then pick up. The U.S. florists used to go through, and then they broke through, just like Downing Park. One of the things that really hurt Downing Park is when they broke through. Downing Park used to end at Du Bois Street, and then they broke through to the 9W, and that wasn't there when I was a kid. South Street ended by the firehouse and Du Bois, and then picked up the 9W, and it kind of ruined the upper portion of Downing Park, which is where they were everyone was talking about the beautiful tulips and everything. But any event, so I grew up on Valley Avenue till I was about 11, and then we moved around the corner. I thought I was moving to another universe. I moved around the corner, and for 1 year, we lived on the corner of West and 3rd Street. And we moved into the apartment that was vacated by Billy and Elaine Campbell. They moved to Bonneville, and Bill's parents owned, Lou and Betty owned upstairs, a two-family house, and we moved in downstairs. Unfortunately, I don't know about unfortunately, but they wound up selling that house because they built a house over in Fullerton, and they sold it to an orthodontist who made our apartment into his office, and then he lived upstairs. And that's when we moved to Rolling Hill, Sherman Drive, you know, past Brooks Funeral Home, and I think it's the Seventh-day Adventist Church. But what they were saying, we walked every place. Night or day. In high school, we used to go to Pepe's after the basketball game, and go midnight at night. At midnight, we'd walk home. And I'm going to tell one last quick story about, and I finally confessed to my mother when she was either 95 or 96. I lived on Valley Avenue, and I had a buddy 2 doors down, Vinny Mann, Vincent Mann, and we were about 8 or 9 years old. And at the Broadway Theater and the Ritz Theater on Saturday afternoons, they used to have double features of things like Abbott Costello, the Bowery Boys, wanted, I didn't go back to hear me. And my parents, who had money, would give, and just as Vinny's parents would give us, 40 cents, because the bus from the corner of Broadway and, of Valley Avenue and 3rd Street was 10 cents. I remember we either got the North Side bus or the Downing Park bus, and it left us at the corner of Broadway and Liberty Street, and then 10 cents to get home. But with that 40 cents, what Vinny and I would do, my mother, there was a little porch, she'd come out and she'd wave, and as soon as she went in, we bolted. We never took the bus, we walked. Because with that 40 cents, it got us into the movie for 20 cents. For a nickel, and you can see why I'm built the way I am, I wouldn't get a candy bar, I would get Good and Plenty because of the nickel. That was a nickel. And then when the movie ended, we either stopped at Texas Hot Wiener for 15 cents, get a hot dog, or walk. On the way home, we'd stop at the Breyer House or Jake Bruner across the street and have a 15-cent ice cream. So that's how we spent my food. So, but
we used to walk in backwards in between the first showing and the second showing. When everybody was leaving the first showing, we walked backwards and saying goodnight.
The only thing I do remember is we used to try to get there early and sit upstairs because it was all kids. And if you sit downstairs, you get hit. Well, popcorn was okay, but then those juju was hurt my region. So, what was it, about juju eggs or whatever? So that's what, my other thing about 40 cents, I had the 40 cent syndrome. When I was in high school, we used to be able to get lunch for 40 cents. You either got a hot meal or you got a little, I guess, a hero sandwich and dessert and whatever. It's 40 cents. Well, we used to bowl. One of my friends had a car, and probably at least once a week, because we had 45 minutes, we went over to Pete's Hot Dogs. For 40 cents, I could get 2 hot dogs, so 15 cents each, and 10 cents. But my good buddy Bill Neal, who lived right across from the water tower on Carpenter, and I played basketball with him from the time we were 10 years old. Bill was about 6'1", 6'2", really, but he was lean. But I never saw anyone eat the way he did. And he was an only child. His father's brother was president of the Newburgh Savings Bank, and he had 5 kids. And his father's sister was the clerk of the Board of Education, and she wasn't very much. So Bill had 3 sons of parents. So instead of the 40 cents we had, Bill used to have a bar. And his lunch was 6 hot dogs and a 10-cent ice. And I always remember that. The 40-cent lunch.
Does anybody have other questions for us? Places that you remember that want to share? Yeah.
Well, I want to tell Alan, he's got a big portion of his house, it was our basketball court.
Oh, when we lived on the corner of West and 3rd for the year, Billy's younger brother Harold, who played with Mickey Rakowski and played at Columbia and became a dentist, he had a basket. And across 3rd Street, the people that lived there had a basket. We could play full court, and one guy would have to stop the traffic. But,
That was a foul, wasn't it?
yeah.
You could play a car.
Then we played Steve Shapiro became a doctor, and then when we moved to Rolling Hills, we used to play the Bull property down on Genie Avenue there. And except that they had a couple of times we got chased away by some animals or something.
Does anyone here on the
baseball field
yes,
where
yes, sir.
Behind my house.
I have 3 or 4 memories of Newburgh that are not really covered by any of this conversation.
Good.
One was Edison decided to build a power plant here and light the streets for us. Secondly, the city council decided to put parking meters in on Broadway, and the kids used to steal the coins out of it. And then they fluoridated the water, whether you wanted it or not, you had to drink it. But one that touches me most personally was the introduction of television. Came to Newburgh before it went anyplace else in the world. And they tested
right. They tested TV in Newburgh.
Yep.
They tested many things. They tested the fluoride that you're talking about putting in the water. They tested the polio vaccine here. I was a polio pioneer. I still got my badge. I got the test shots and then the real shots. But they indeed did test television here because 2 reasons. You can put a receiving tower on the top of Mount Beacon and bounce a signal from RCA in Manhattan up here. So physically we were a good spot, but also, and this speaks to the whole theme today, demographically, we were a perfect mix of population to test. That we were not a homogeneous, one-size community, that they knew if they broadcast a signal to Newburgh, that you would get a mix of ages and ethnicities and interests and economic levels in the feedback of that test audience. And so I know the TVs were these tiny little round screen tubes, and people tell me from my parents' generation that everybody clustered up and down the street to get to one of the test TVs and watch, And they would just watch and wait till the test pattern came on and think it was magic. But they could try out the first kinds of broadcasts here, and just like the theater that we talked about earlier, that, you know, the Academy of Music that became the Academy Movie Theater, but that was a test run for Broadway shows. They would come and play here, like you play in Boston today, and then go to New York. Well, the same thing with television. We were such a good mixed demographic that we were used as a sampling of America. We were kind of the hometown America mix that you look for.
But Mary, let me interrupt you for 1 second, because Dave has a great story about his family have a TV in his bar, and McDermott's bar was one of the first, what was that, was it the first bar to have like a bar, have a TV over the bar?
It was the first television set produced and sold anywhere in the world. And it was located at my father's bar on Ann Street. And that same television set is now operating in a museum in Hilliard, Ohio. And if anybody wants to look it up on the internet, it's Early Television Museum, and it identifies my family.
And people would stream in to watch the test pattern, and no matter how late they got it,
And
couldn't believe it. Look at that, the test pattern.
there were so many of them they couldn't get to the bar.
So a museum in America today holds a television that was the first one showing the public what the magic of that technology could
Yep.
do, and it was first installed in your dad's bar on Ann Street in Newburgh.
Yep.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. Yes, in the back?
I'd like to mention Bo Gill, who used to
Yeah.
write for the evening news, and would always have the sports stories. And a funny story, I was older, but when John Kennedy was running for president, he came to Newburgh. And my parents went to the green room where there was a reception and had their picture taken with Kennedy. And my mother hated the picture because she hated the way she looked in the hat. So she cut herself out of the picture. So my father went to Bo Gill and said, could you please reprint, have a picture recopied for me? And I have the picture right here with her, between my parents, with Kennedy in between, with her hat on the head.
That's wonderful. You know, we were blessed with many good reporters in Newburgh when we had local news and local coverage and a local editorial office. Bo Gill reported on Newburgh mostly for sports, but for other activities too. Lots of social events were covered by Bo Gill. Jeannie's mother was a reporter for the Newburgh News. And we were just lucky that we had a hometown perspective on our hometown, but by people who were skilled. I remember when the Evening News, the name of the Newburgh News, when it rolled over to its final life, the Evening News closed on a Friday. And about a month later, I met a former editor of the old Evening News out at dinner. I recognized him and I went over, and I was so upset because if you knew anything about how the Evening News maintained its archive, there was a woman named Ruth, not Jeannie's mother, who used to take care of everything and file it and keep all the photos and keep all the stories. They dumped it. When they closed the Evening News in the 70s, they just dumped it. It was now an out-of-town ownership, and they didn't care. And that was an archive of Newburgh stories and pictures that went back to the 1880s. And I walked up to this man, John Prizzi, at dinner and said, oh, I know about the paper folding, but I said, it's just so tragic about the archive, the paper's morgue, the story of our community. And he burst into tears. Now, this was a pillar of the community. This was an editor of the local paper. But it was such a blow to lose the threads of our story that it really hurt him personally. And so the Bo Gill connection is, you know, I picked up the Middletown Record this morning. The bylines are from all over the country now. The news is from all over the country. It's like going to your doctor who's in the great, you know, conglomerate practice where you don't know who you're going to get next. The news is now a great conglomerate, and we're being fed things that aren't so local, and we miss that. We miss the kinds of stories we're telling at this table. Yeah, you had a question there.
I suppose that's a good transition. I'm a journalist, actually.
Okay.
I've been in touch with some of you on the panel. I'm working on a story about 1960s welfare reform and Joseph Mitchell here in Newburgh. So I was wondering.
Yes, Genie mentioned him. Yes.
I was wondering if anyone on the panel or anyone else could talk about how that kind of changed the town, and if you or your family had any stories from that time. I'm saying
Did that make an impression in your homes? When Newburgh was broadcast coast to coast on NBC with a 1-hour special, which was a long time zone, usually TV shows were not an hour in prime time, and that Battle of Newburgh show aired, did that make an impression in your households? Did your family talk about that?
Hell yeah.
Hell yeah, yours did. Anybody else? No?
I remember that. I just have one little quick one. That my dad was no longer city manager when all this happened. He was out, but he was commuting to Albany. He so dreaded moving us, his 3 kids. He was a widower. He had 3 little wild kids, and he didn't want to take us all to Albany. He held out for like 3 years, but in '63 we finally moved. But in the meantime, people on city council were still calling him and saying, "What do you think about this? Wasn't this awful that this NBC white paper, it was the first NBC white paper, the Battle of Newburgh. Isn't that terrible what they did to us?" And I remember Dad saying, I was just a little girl, but I'll never forget, he said, he said, there was Irving Green, for example, called him and said, it wasn't a travelogue, it was a documentary. It wasn't meant to show the beautiful aspects and the scenes of the river and the beautiful areas of Downing Park and all the wonders of Newburgh. It was meant to show the conflict that arose when a demagogue appealed to the lowest common denominators of people's fears and ignorance about their neighbors.
Yeah. Yes, ma'am?
I remember that. I mean, my father was very upset about that whole time frame that you're talking about. He was president of the Y here for years and years and years, and spent a lot of time developing, the organization for youth. And I actually probably grew up there. My earliest memories are running around the track of the Y.
Yeah.
I know all these guys from the Y and summer camp, and he fostered equal opportunity and non-prejudice for everybody. That was always that's how we were raised. And he was very, very upset by all of that. And they did not join the Palatine Club because they wouldn't have let Jews or blacks in. So,
Yeah, somebody back way in the back, too. Yes, back in the back, ma'am?
Yes, he was the big.
He was first, okay.
We're focused on things that happened in the 1960s, as if nothing happened after that. I mean, I wrote a store on Broadway from 1992 to 2006, or somewhere around there, I don't know exactly. And Newburgh was still a very vibrant town in that era, and people got along. My store was probably 50% black and 50% white customers when I first bought it. It switched as more Spanish people came in at the end. But there's no conversation of anything that happened past like 1960 or 70. I know all that history because I was alive. I'm an old man. But I played basketball with Alan, and he could tell you that, and I know all of these stories. But we're in ancient history. Isn't there anybody that knows anything about? There must be some younger people.
Well, that's another program for another day, I guess.
This is growing up in Newburgh, not grown up in Newburgh.
Well, I grew up in Newburgh, but I also.
It's a good idea, because there are some younger faces here, and there are people who have another perspective. But
I also watched other people grow up in Newburgh later on.
Well, I guess we need another.
I agree.
We need part
But
two.
you've got older people here telling you what young people today would never have seen.
because they weren't here yet. So another part, I'm sure the library would host more of these. Ma'am, you had a question also?
No.
No?
No,
Okay.
she was just trying to get your attention.
Oh, all right. I just wanted you all to have your opportunity to ask before we go, because I know the library will throw us out in a little bit.
I just have a comment.
I just have a comment about that white paper that we're talking about. I was in high school at the time, and I do remember my parents and me being really upset because it was an alpha program, and it was so biased that they showed the same couple of streets in Newburgh going up and down it and not the rest of them. It painted such a horrible picture. And also, don't forget, it was about the time of urban renewal, which I'm surprised nobody had touched on. I know Wilbur was involved. I know the young lady over here that was involved. That might want to talk a little bit about what happened with urban renewal, which they knocked everything down and they never built back up.
I can tell you that about what happened with urban renewal.
Let's get back to the lady who had her question for us.
It's
Yes,
not a
ma'am.
question, it's a comment.
Sure.
First of all, I've enjoyed this afternoon very much. I'm surprised that I haven't heard anything about growing up on the Heights. I did not, but my husband's family did. And they regaled us with stories about how wonderful it was the whole time my daughters were growing up. They were huge families. The Axelrods, the Crawfords. It was filled with children. Everybody went to Liberty Street School. And at Liberty Street School, they started the day with the Pledge of Allegiance. And they also sang, How Great You Are, or How Great.
They sang both.
Yeah. It was apparently.
They sang both the pledge and the
Wonderful place to grow
Yeah,
up.
I think that what we've heard today is that each neighborhood replicated that story. And I didn't go to Liberty Street School because I wasn't from the Heights, but those kids had the same kinds of places that they gathered to play,
Yes.
like Gina was describing. They made their own fun. They had green spaces that they congregated to as soon as they were old enough to leave the view of the front porch and their mother or their grandmother. That we've gotten a picture today of neighborliness. We've gotten a little taste of what most people haven't seen from the past. Let me tell you that we're glad today that the former president of the Newburgh Historical Society, Russell Lang, brought a drive of images of kids in Newburgh through the years, and that we will, that was a wonderful gift to a program like this. We will take them and put them up on the Historical Society website as kind of a slideshow for you all to log in and use. The other thing I want to point out for all of you who are curious, go downstairs to the local history room. And there is an entire aisle of books that look like this. These are the city directories. And it's how, as city historian, I learn a lot. You can go through here like a phone book alphabetically and see who's who. But not just what's your name, but where do you work. So if I look up the Higginses, I know where Wilbur's father went to work in the morning, you know? And if I go to a street, I know who else lived on Galloway Avenue with Gina. So it's a geographical index and it's a name index, including employment. This is only 1960. They run from 1858 to 1978. So you can track your city through these wonderful directories in the library anytime.
No, only when the history room is open.
Only when the history room is open, that's true, and it should be open more. I lobby for that too. Yes.
One of the other things that I didn't hear anybody talk about was the scouting program. That so many of us were so involved in Boy Scouts, Cub Scouts, and all that, and the tremendous number of hours that we spent doing scouting activities. You know, over at the Armory, which is on South William Street, they always had a Boy Scout week, you know, and we'd all go over there and build towers out of sticks, you know, and lash them all together, and the tremendous amount of time that we spent with kids our own age, or a little bit older than us, growing up in the scouting program, getting merit badges and all that good stuff. It was good farm highlight.
My father spent many years as a scout leader and had my earliest childhood memories. I felt like I had a tribe of older brothers because my father had an Eagle Scout troop.
Oh, wow.
So they all were at our house all the time. And the Eagle Scouts, where we met with his Eagle Scout group, was actually the American Legion on MacArthur Avenue over in New Windsor. But he did a lot of work at West Street School, very close to us. He went to West Street School, where my father went to school. But I remember being there for Pinewood Derbies and all kinds of things with Cub Scouts and things like that. I always hear, I have patients come into my office that tell me that both my grandmothers were scout leaders. My grandmother, Prokosch, my dad's mom, was a Cub Scout leader and that's where he got his start in scouting. She did it for many years at West Street. And then my grandmother, Sylvester, my mom's mom, had Girl Scout troops at Sacred Heart, and they were both scout leaders, because that was a big part of it. It was a big part of our growing up, and my father spent many years with
I
scouts.
think churches sponsored scouting, social organizations sponsored scouting. I went to scout day camp at Algonquin Park. They used to haul us out there because we had lots of room to run around. Sir, in the back, you've got a question.
Yes, I have a question about how I heard stories about how the town used to be and how they tore it down and they didn't put. I'm sorry, can anyone hear me?
Yeah, just
And how they tore it down and didn't put them back. Has anyone ever thought about like opening up vocational programs for like construction for the youth to probably get them in the field to probably get more
Well, that
workers?
is, earlier in this conversation, somebody over here said, what are they doing up behind NFA? They've clear cut those woods. That is about to be a big vocational technical education school for just that. You know, Newburgh is such a large school district that it has never been part of the BOCES system, which is all the smaller school districts pool their resources, and they have construction trades, and masonry and carpentry, just what you're talking about, culinary trades, etc. If you are in a smaller district like Cornwall or Marlborough, you go on a bus. Newburgh is about to build what they're calling the Career and Technical Education Academy, like another NFA, but for the construction trades, with the idea that when you finish in that program, you are just like coming out of the IBEW or one of the unions. You're ready to go to work. Somebody else over here?
I hope they're more successful with that program than they were with urban renewal. Because urban renewal hit me. My father had a business. He owned one of the last buildings down on what was Water Street back then. And it had been children's street store before we owned it. And they just took it from us. They stole it, basically. Urban renewal gave us next to nothing for it. And wore it down, and you know what? It's still empty. This happened, back in 1950 something, maybe 60 something, I'm not sure. And it's still nothing now.
Newburgh is definitely an example of the federal housing and urban renewal program going on.
Well, I hope
we have
the
not
plan you
recovered
have on the hill behind NFA works better than urban renewal.
Hey, Mary,
Let me also, yes.
Yep.
Dan?
I think you worked for Urban Renewal for a little while, and I did as well out of college, and I agree that it was probably a disaster what happened afterwards, but Urban Renewal was not charged with redeveloping. They were charged with acquiring the properties, relocating the residents, and then taking down the buildings and make it ready for development, but not to develop it. It was the city of Newburgh was charged with developing it, and we all know what's happened over the years. We had Rouse Corporation here, we had American Cities here, who developed the harbor in Baltimore. They did Quincy Markets up in Boston. We didn't go in that direction. But it wasn't urban renewal. And I'm not defending urban renewal, but we weren't charged back then. I was a kid out of college then. But we weren't charged with redevelopment. We were making it ready for redevelopment, and the city has just not done what they needed to do.
Exactly right, because the whole idea of urban renewals was a thing. Public administration was a new course of study back in the 40s. Nobody had ever heard of such a thing, but people could then major in it. They could get graduate degrees, get their master's in public administration. People had come up with this idea, urban renewal, where they thought, it sounded like a good idea. It sounds like a joke now, but it sounded like a good idea to revitalize the old crumbling infrastructure and inner cities after the war, after World War II. And so federal money became available for such a thing, but that's where Newburgh failed miserably to follow through with that, on that money that we got. Yes, sir.
I think the reason that Newburgh failed miserably is because there was so much political BS going on, okay? And it wasn't urban renewal, it was urban destruction. That's what they were doing. And there was a lot of things that were happening that I knew as a young guy was going on, but nothing ever come out of it. You know, like one of the churches, they took all the pews and they put them someplace in a warehouse. And the guy that was running the program sold them, and where'd that money go? Things like that, but it was all urban destruction. And as far as Mitchell and the rest of them, that was also a political thing. And, you know, we could spend hours talking yes and no on that. But, you know, it's a thing behind us, but we should be looking forward. I mean, we talk about our background. I was brought up on the Heights. We talk about the Heights, and nobody say anything about the Heights. I was brought up on the Heights, and I went to Liberty Street School and blah, 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 and all that good stuff. But I never knew what a black person was. Because I never, as a kid growing up on the Heights, I never saw a black person until we played basketball. And we were playing against, I think it was Broadway School. And that's the first time I saw a black kid playing basketball. And that was then. It was a whole different era. Liberty Street School, my father went to Liberty Street School. And you couldn't go in the front door of Liberty because if you were a girl, you could, but if you were a boy, you weren't allowed to. Little nothing things like that. It's a whole different world, you know? But let's look forward, let's move forward.
Absolutely,
You know?
absolutely. We're, on behalf of the library, the Historical Society, we're very glad you came to listen and share. We are, it's not working? Oh well. We will, at first it was the dog, and then it's the batteries. We look forward to ideas for future programs. If you want to hear more about some of the topics today or others, as I say, we're going to put more pictures of, you know, children in Newburgh through the years up on the Historical Society website. One way to roll around Newburgh is to go online, and increasingly the New York Heritage website has pictures of Newburgh. Urban Archive, which is a telephone app where you can map your way around and poke different streets and see pictures. So there are other ways to explore when you can't get together in a room like today. If you're curious about the Historical Society that sponsored this today, this is their brochure. This is their membership information if you want to be on the list to be told about other events like this. These are all over on the table to the left. Each one of these, be sure to read about Louis Levy, our friend here. We're lucky to have a local novelist participating today who is able to recount Newburgh in the old days. So it's not just a story today, though, of the old days, I would say. This is a story of what a child's eye view of Newburgh was like for the generation before this one. So I'm not of this generation anymore, I'm well aware of that. So we're giving you a child's eye view of Newburgh stepping back with some ideas perhaps as you listen to these folks' stories of things we can be doing now so that in 40 years another group of people can sit in the library and remember good about Newburgh, New York. Alan wanted to say something.
I just want to say in conclusion with regard to today's program, I'd be remiss if I did not thank the Newburgh Board of Education for providing this venue for us today. And also, I'd like to thank all the participants in today's program, not only our distinguished panel and moderators, but also many of you in our audience who asked questions, offered insight to some of your memories of growing up in Newburgh. And in conclusion, on a personal level, I want to give my best wishes to all those in attendance today, and to all those who will have an opportunity to view this program on YouTube for a safe, happy, and healthy holiday season for all of you and your families. Amen.
Thank you.